Not yet. We need to get there. China is. India is building a 25,000-mile Golden Triangle highway system to connect its major cities in the heartland of India. Why? To move people and goods more efficiently, more effectively, with lower cost. They're competing with us in the world marketplace. China last year produced 546 million tons of raw steel. The largest production, the highest production of raw steel in the history of the Industrial Revolution was in the United States in 1979. I know I come from iron ore country in northern Minnesota. We provide the iron ore for our steel industry. 129 million tons of steel, the highest in the history of the Industrial Revolution. China now produces more raw steel than all the rest of the world combined by twice. And they're not doing it with ox carts. They're doing with high speed, high technology equipment. Those are not open pot smelting operations anymore. The steel mill at Lai Wu has only vapor emitted. They recapture all the stack emissions. They recycle all the water from the internal processes of the steel mill because they have only 11% annual moisture in Shandong province, and they need all that water for crop growing and for human consumption. And so they are on their way, and they're way ahead of us on their way. Now, if we're going to be competitive in this 21st century marketplace, then we've got to do the same. We've got to do the same kind of investment and more of it. China has just surpassed Japan as the second largest economy with a $1.3 trillion gross domestic product. Ours is $13 trillion. You mean we can't invest in the future of transportation of this country? In 1956, Eisenhower signed the Interstate Highway Program into law, National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. It was an idea that struck him in 1927 when, as a captain, he led a convoy from the East Coast to the West Coast to demonstrate that it was possible by vehicle to traverse the United States. But as he wrote in his memoirs along the line, how would we be able to move people and goods in a time of war with the wretched condition of these roads and bridges, where they had to avoid bridges because they couldn't carry the tanks of the day or their armored personnel carriers of the day? As World War II was winding down, President Roosevelt directed a study, funding for a study of upgrading America's highways according to a plan developed by E.J. McDonald of the Bureau of Public Roads in the late 1930s. That study was completed, recommended a system of 44,000 miles of highways, but after World War II, resettling 16 million veterans, converting wartime to a peacetime economy, building housing, and educating the returning veterans, road investment was put off the table until 1953-54, when projections were that we'd be killing 100,000 people a year on our roadways if we didn't do something. Congestion was choking America's goods movement and people movement. And so Eisenhower directed General Lucius Clay to head a commission to review that Roosevelt-era report, update it, and make a recommendation to the Congress. And that recommendation was for a 42,500-mile system, now 47,000 miles, of interstate highways. Access-controlled, divided highway system. But it left open the question of how to finance it. George Humphreys was Eisenhower's Secretary of Treasury. He had been a bond trader on Wall Street and a CEO of U.S. Steel. He said the way to finance the transportation of the future is to float bonds, and we'll pay off those bonds into the future. And my predecessor, John Blotnick, was one of those 5 co-authors of the Interstate Highway System in the House. He said, we got together and said, you know, by the time we pay back the capital on the bonds, the interest on the bonds, and the fees to the bond traders, there isn't going to be much left to build highways with. So we said, no, we don't like that idea. And furthermore, you don't have a map. You've got to show us a map to connect every city of 50,000 population or greater. and then Congress adjourned the end of June. It's a very sensible thing to do. They didn't have much air conditioning in those days. They took the train to go home. And when they came back in January, there was a plan, and they had proposed a 3-cent user fee. The gasoline was selling at 30 cents a gallon. 3 cents was 10% of the cost of fuel. Eisenhower embraced it. Congress passed it, House and Senate both. Eisenhower signed the bill into law in June. September, construction had already started. But a year later, the Bureau of Public Roads came back and said, that 3 cents isn't going to be enough. We need another penny. That 1 cent increase in the gas tax passed on a voice vote in the House. You can hardly pass the prayer on a voice vote anymore. But they had vision. They had a sense of what America needed and the direction this country needed to go. And they invested in that vision. And now it's up to us to build on that investment, because we are today where they were in 1954, 55, 56. Congestion choking our cities. You did it here in Atlanta. Mayor Joseph Hartsfield was the first mayor to testify at hearings of the House Aviation Committee on the future of air travel in America. We were on the threshold of the jet era. Nobody knew what that meant. President Eisenhower had just created the Federal Aviation Administration out of the old Civil Aeronautics Administration, and recommended a funding of $100 million, which would be worth about 6 or 7 times that value today, to build runways and taxiways. And Mayor Hartsfield's testimony at that hearing was stunning. He said, we don't know what this jet age is going to bring. We don't know whether we're going to board the aircraft on the ground or from a bridge. And we certainly can't have the runways we have today. You can't risk having one of those jets roll down a runway and suck up a horseshoe into its engine. So we need better quality runways, and this Congress has to invest, and the Congress did. And now you have the world's busiest airport. 77 million passengers, 438,000 operations, takeoffs and landings a year, 4 major runways, a 5th one to be added, as I said earlier. Americans are making their choice. For the last 5 years, we're adding 1 million new transit riders a day in the nation's transit systems. Bus rapid transit, bus systems, light rail, commuter rail, streetcars, trolleys, circulator systems that link communities, get people out of their car, get congestion out of the roadway. Population has grown over the last 15 years. Population nationwide has grown 14%. Auto travel has grown 21%. But transit trips have grown 43%. This is what we need to do. We need our highway systems today. We need to upgrade them. We need to invest in them. We need also to have more compact growth, as you're doing here in Atlanta, as I saw this morning on the tour that we took on the way from the airport. Areas of the city that were run down, dilapidated, hollowed out construction areas or manufacturing facilities now are thriving. People are living, and now they're going to be served by transit. Beginning with bus, and then I expect with light rail, and we'll see more of that, or I expect to see more of that this afternoon. When I graduated from college in 1956, I won a scholarship to the College of Europe in Bruges, Belgium, to study European economic integration. It was just at its beginning stage. In fact, the treaties of Rome were signed in June of 1957, the year we completed our program. And I traveled from the Twin Cities to Chicago on the Milwaukee 400. 400 miles in 400 minutes. Cover of Time magazine had the Milwaukee 400 on its cover, said the fastest steam locomotive in the world. Why, it can travel 110 miles an hour. You know, it's still 400 miles and it's still 400 minutes. And I got to Paris, and Paris to Brussels was 6.5 hours by train. That's the distance New York to Washington. Today, that 6.5-hour trip is 45 minutes. There is no commercial air service between Brussels, the capital of Europe, and Paris, the capital of France. But every 3 minutes from 6 in the morning to midnight, a train is leaving in each direction with 1,100 passengers on board at speeds of nearly 200 miles an hour. People live in Brussels, work at UNESCO in Paris, and come back home for dinner that night. What's wrong with our picture? We need to have the same vision of investment in the moving of people and goods in our economy. We have the world's premier freight network. It now has to partner once again with cities to include passenger rail service, as it did at its very inception, between 1850 and 1871, when the federal government gave the railroads 173 million acres of public land for the public use, convenience, and necessity to build rail service for people and goods movement. We need to recapture that past and build on it for the future. How did that come to be in Europe? In 1968, President Charles de Gaulle convened his cabinet and asked them to approve funding for a study of a high-speed passenger rail system in France. The SNCF, Société Nationale des Chemins de Fer, was called La Société Nationale du Cafouillis, the National Screw-Up Society. The Commission a year later reported on its vision for a high-speed rail system to travel in excess of 170 miles an hour. And after the presentation was completed, the finance minister asked, "Combien ça va coûter? How much is that going to cost?" And when told, "Oh non, la France ne peut pas faire ça va nuire aux finances de la France. That's going to harm our finances." And the health minister said, "No, ça va nuire à la santé de la France. That's going to harm the health of France." And the defense minister. And at the end, all the ministers opposed it. And de Gaulle simply asked, "Y a-t-il un autre pays au monde qui a la même technologie? Is there another country in the world that has this technology?" The answer was no. Alors la France sera la première. No. Well then, France will be the first. We need to have that vision. We need to have Eisenhower's vision again of investing in America. We need to have de Gaulle's vision that America will be the first, and you are being the first here in Atlanta with the plans you are laying. Thank you very much for what you're doing.